Trialectics. Level 1. Resource shares. Resource-based economy. Some form of traditional currency ought to remain, covering what might be called the scientific and industrial sectors. A sustainable and productive resource-based business ought to be rewarded for the output, and that's why a traditional economy should, I believe, still remain in the 3-level economy. So, there would, however, even at this level, this resource-based level, be adjustments that would automatically arise, driven both by heart shares and mind share levels of economy, the other two, wherein sustainable and integrative approaches would be the only solutions allowed to manifest themselves. What would that mean? So traditionally, economics partly assumed infinite resources. Infinite, I mean, not, yeah, so, and because there has not been separation between these different levels of economy, the compassionate and artistic domains, that is sort of the other domains of one's being, were often excluded, or at least not taken to be important. So the market structures continually adjust to some extent to offset this imbalance, but it's not enough. So through state funding of arts and the like, that can happen to some extent, but this is in a sense emboldening the frustration for those primarily working in the domains of sort of the industrial sector, let's say. So which in turn, for sake of survival, almost requires businesses that must produce to engage in underhanded tactics in the shadows, and often unseen and unknown by the public at large. So you get kind of these CEOs that kind of take on these sort of sociopathic characteristics. So, one example of how underhanded tactics could lead to massive gains within the business domain would be through that. Scarcity drives up the prices of resources, and this is led in some occasions to false or even consciously created scarcity. So, for example, you dump pollutants in the water so that people can't drink it, so they got to buy a bottled water. But to avoid the problems noted above, there are higher order economies in this system that act as regulators to that economic system. But this is very important in some sense, but less important when you engage these other levels. Yeah, so the fiat system implemented, for example, through the Federal Reserve, we've seen kind of a corrupting faculty due to how it's been coordinated historically. So one would want to ensure there are tangible resources to back up every dollar, and this is not done in the fiat currency system where there's nothing back. It's all figments of our imagination. Sort of. You're actually helping to ensure less potential for corruption by creating higher orders of currencies, I believe. Because each dollar would equate to something physical in this resource-based level, unlike the intangibles in the markets. I'm working with that idea. Right now, like, I'm kind of seeing doctors as maybe part of the resource-based economy, but simultaneously in the heart shares. So it's got to be worked out a bit. This is a holy theory. So a currency doing work within a system that it doesn't functionally fit within causes more problems than it solves, I believe. So this level of economy is lower, not lower, but this resource level, the objective side of economy, sort of things like psychology, maybe service-based things, art, kind of highly mental things, wouldn't be included, but more industrial sorts of work would. So an example, you have a lady that's involved in the production of cars. She enjoys the logistics of crafting those cars and working with the robots that would probably be more prevalent in the future. And all these cutting edge technologies such as blacklight power, for example. But before the production of the product moves forward, the mindshare workers would ensure it's an integrated and sustainable solution, and the heart share workers would ensure that it will not compromise the ethics of the society, and that's collectively determined through that heart share network. I'll get into that in the next part with the heart shares. So the creators and overseers of the intelligence hub, which would have a big part of the mind shares, again, arguably the internet is first level generation of that, but the mind shares would have, the people with the mind shares, which we'll talk about later, would have more of a say in the creation of the novelty. So a basic subsistence level of all three levels of these resources would be these three levels, and the shares through them would be guaranteed to each individual as sort of an inalienable right. And I think there are great reasons to want everybody to have at least a minimal amount of each of them. Because if there were to be a motto for those working within this particular resource level, it might be something like, may I maximize efficiency and functionality of all industry and sciences that I work within for the needs of others. For the needs. There's also the important fact that our technology is advancing quickly and eliminating the need for jobs that at one time were required. The Zeitgeist talks a lot about this. After we adjust for those technical, the technicalities of this, a lot of those jobs that people wouldn't have found satisfying could be left behind, and we can do more satisfying work. So many of the menial jobs of the ancient men would be gone. We will go back to that later. So, the problem of the economy requiring to bind itself to intangibles will bump into problems at this sort of level of heart shares. But the whole nature of heart shares are interpreted as a collective we, and are deciding what is the most good direction for the collective. So I'm going to flesh that out in just a minute. So this doesn't mean that all people have to stop doing hands-on physical labor. Rather, the choice becomes broader, and the ability to engage in meaningful labor increases through this sort of thing. So looking at the mind shares, so mind shares, or sort of heart shares, right? Heart shares is the second level, and essentially what they are doing is offsetting the ethical domain, the legislative domain, in a sense. You can hook these deeply to governance, and I think that they would be, I hope, maybe that's the best way to go forward, eliminating sort of these heads of government, and you become the government through the economy, in a sense. So in essence, there are legislators and service workers within a society, these heart shares workers, and if one is engaging in this level of economy, you don't have to, very much, to some extent. Maybe there's something that I have other ideas about it, but I won't speak to it now. So they're also heavily involved in checking the ethics of the integrated solutions presented by mindshare domains and the industrial resource shares. So the computer and intelligence systems allow them to process huge swaths of data and categorize them, systematize, and so forth. These workers apply hermeneutics to overall systems and obstacles that we come across, and people are denoted a limited amount of these heart shares, and I think age might play a part, and then increase in sort of something like that. Many of these projects would be collaborative and work within a framework that is neither fully determined nor radically free, but sort of paradoxically both. That's sort of, I don't know, maybe that's a possibility. There's also the collective focus on best possible outcomes, the idea being that you don't have an infinite number of choices, but you have arguably a lot of choices at any given time, and you're trying to choose roughly what would be the best among them, most win-win-win sort of solutions. And it's aligning the functionality of all those solutions and the behavior to make a more ethical choice. Sometimes at odds with, interestingly enough, the industrial, and so that's often designated back to the mind shares, as we'll see. The heart share level of economy can help neutralize the dominating and dominated relationships within society, I believe. So therefore, this level suggests that to gain proficiency within it, one must develop both one's cognitive understanding and one's moral understanding, because at least from what I'm going on, cognition is necessary but not sufficient for moral development. So to be engaging in the heart share economy at a high level, one must sort of have developed psychologically, but you could still absolutely engage in it as a 12-year-old. So thus, if you have a motto for this level, it might be something like, may I be of service to all sentient beings, or most sentient beings, and living in the mystery while doing it, or something like that. So there would be a rating system. In other words, through the internet, you're going to rate people, or more interactive. It would probably be like cell phones and passing the heart shares back and forth. And this is having sort of cultural effects so that those technicians within a particular domain at the local, national, international level have a legislative decision-making ability. Really, that's what the heart shares are. There's no real tangible benefit necessarily, but it gives them a power that they deserve because people believe in them ethically. So it is like a money, but it's a different kind of money. If and only if your basic needs are already accounted for, which I believe they can. That's kind of the communistic element. It's not totally communist. It's not totally democratic, and it's even partly authoritarian, but not very much. So you got this kind of mixing of the three in a sense. The democratic side saying that, okay, you get to vote on everything almost that you want to vote on. So this gets us into the third level, and that's the balancing force of the mindshare economy, if you will. And the tricky part of the mindshares is that, in a sense, it is the most complex because it's highly subjective in a way. So this economy is a system to maintain and expand novelty and ensure sort of synergies between paradoxes. So there would, and is of course, a community, the adequate sort of ish, maybe. In this community would probably be mostly elders, but not restricted to them. There's always going to be exceptions to that for sure, and you're going to be engaged in it to some extent. But the people at the maybe making the most profound decisions and building the biggest projects are probably going to be kind of highly skilled in some sense. So they would be driven to create through a feeling of superabundance and overflowing. Why create that which is new or that which transcends what we have? Because there appears, at least within my consciousness, to be a drive to create, sort of manifest something that's bigger and more inclusive and better-ish. So from a traditional view of economy, this economy structure may not appear to be readily useful. It could actually seem from a pragmatic point of view to be unuseful or a drain. I won't get into that too much, but I think it's not really the case because you need these pioneers to create things that are new so that people can go forward into it. The thinkers are useful in that way. In a more traditional context, these individuals would be, so you go back a couple thousand years, and the shamans acted crazy, and they would have, been sort of people that show you different ways of looking at the world, more modern. Then it was probably the priests, and then kind of the scientists. You need them, and artists. Artists are always there to do that. The scientists maybe not so much. Sometimes the Einsteins. So they may appear crazy and way outside the book, or the box, or something like that. And these individuals can bring clarity to paradoxes, perhaps, resolving them and allowing for a higher order manifestation of them. Dame. Blessings.